what Crowley had done was, in a way, broadcast something, but obviously he simply passed on some impulse in exactly the way that your television control passes on a radio impulse and changes the television program. So in other words, there is something quite rational and logical about this idea of magic.
And it's, to me, because this idea of will again, do you think that is the, we could term it whatever we want, but I choose to put the word universe on it. Is it the universe that is responding to our will and then consequently manifesting that? Or what do you think it is?
Well, let me put it this way. I do believe deeply that there are forces outside human beings. I don't think we're alone in the universe, as science tends to think. This sort of view that we're an empty, godless universe and there's not a lot we can do. The reason that I think these people who preach atheism, for example, are a bad joke is that it seems to me to be completely irrelevant, except that by holding a belief like this, you are in fact crippling yourself. It's like deliberately tying your feet together and then wondering why you can't walk.
Right.
I do feel that we possess all kinds of powers which we can only discover by a certain kind of focus, a certain kind of concentration. Now, in one of my books, I called this focus Faculty X. And I think that the secret of life lies to a very large extent in Faculty X. As an example of Faculty X, I've often pointed out that Proust discovers it in that book, The Recherche du Temps Perdu, that when Proust tastes the biscuit dipped in tea, he suddenly experiences an exquisite feeling of pure happiness. And then when he tries it again, he tries to think, now what is this? Why do I feel this pure happiness? And then he remembers that as a small boy, his Aunt Leonie used to give him the same kind of biscuit, dipped in the same kind of herb tea. And that suddenly, the taste of a biscuit dipped in this same herb tea has brought back the whole feeling of this delight and ecstasy that he experienced as a small boy. Now, you can see that, in a way, it's almost a kind of mechanical thing, one thing evoking another. But it could be done, obviously, far more with far more deliberation. In other words, we could learn to induce Faculty X once we began to get the trick. Now, the trick, I am absolutely convinced, is to do with focused concentration. When, years ago, I was lecturing at a place called Sheepwash overnight, and in the night it began to snow, and it really snowed and snowed for days, so that when I woke up the next morning, it was quite impossible to get away from this farm because the ground was thick with snow. Well, I was forced to stay around for about 48 hours before I got tired of being stuck there, and I decided I really would make this effort to get home. So I managed to, with the help of other people, to get my car up as far as the gate of this farm, and then I had to drive very, very carefully because, unfortunately, the ditch on either side of the car was full of snow, so I couldn't tell exactly where it was. It would have been very easy to go into the ditch. So I was forced to drive with extreme care, realizing that if I did get into the ditch, I'd be stuck there in the middle of the countryside because nobody would be likely to come along and find me. Well, after something like 2 hours of this kind of intense concentration, I got back on the main road, the road from Exeter down south where I live. And as I began to drive along on this road, I suddenly realized I'd caused a curious feeling of power inside my head, and that it now continued. In fact, it continued all the way home. But what happened was, if I was driving along and I noticed, let's say, a tree or something that suddenly struck me as quite interesting, I'd find that I wanted to look at it as I drove past it. Everything suddenly had this dimension of extra meaning, as if ordinary perception had gone out of its ordinary 2 dimensions and become 3-dimensional. Or even more, as if some extra dimension had been given to ordinary things. Now, clearly, I'd given myself this kind of experience simply by the necessity of concentrating very, very hard.
Right.
And so I felt that in a way I discovered the basic secret, the basic trick. You see, if you think of it, Dostoevsky, for example, has many of these moments in which his heroes talk about the great intensity that they've experienced in certain moments. And one of them, Raskolnikov, says, if I had to stand on a narrow ledge for ever and ever in eternal darkness and eternal tempest, I would still prefer that rather than to die at once. And you can see that, in fact, a narrow ledge, if you realize that, you're likely to die, would in fact produce in you this kind of concentration that was produced in me by this drive back from Sheepwash. So I feel that this is the answer. That what I've done is produce a form of what I call faculty X. This sudden awareness as if things have been given an extra dimension, as if reality has been given an extra dimension. Now, what I feel is that once this has happened, not only does this become accessible to you, but there is a sense in which it's accessible all the time, even when you're feeling, very tired, for example.
Yeah.
It remains there and can be recovered. I find it extremely interesting now, at the age of 69, as 78, I've forgotten how old I am. I find it extremely interesting to notice every day of my life how I can induce these moments of intensity, because every day brings a new kind of challenge.
Yeah.
And what I believe is that it should be possible for all human beings to deliberately set themselves these challenges and, to continue in a way forever.
Yeah. It's. Do you think that this is a state that we could be in all the time, or is this a draining state, if I can put it that way, meaning that we have to return? Obviously, we have to sleep still and things like that as normal. That I understand, but is it a state that we as awake human beings can be in all the time? Do you think, or do we need rest from this state?
No, I don't think we would want to be in such a state all the time. You see, it's rather like saying that a rich man has made an extremely hard struggle to get his riches, and now does he have to make the same struggle every day? Well, no. Once he's got the riches, he can stop struggling.
Right.
And the same goes for this intensity we're speaking of.
Maybe it's more of attaining a level, or crossing a threshold, if you will, or coming over a threshold. Is that more likely, or is that more what you mean, maybe?
What did you say? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
All right, I can phrase that again. Maybe you think, maybe you mean it's more like crossing a threshold of sorts, meaning that if we attain a certain level, then the chances that we fall back are not so, they're pretty slim, if I put it that way. Maybe that's what you mean.
That's right. That is what I mean.
Yeah.
It is indeed a kind of threshold. And once you're aware of the presence of this threshold, then everything becomes different.
Do you think that that's more true of how reality